A cholera outbreak is declared in cyclone-ravaged northern Mozambique. On this Press Freedom Day, there's good news out of Ethiopia, as Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed lifts restrictions on the media and frees detained bloggers and journalists. And Nigerian performer Davido headlines the Coming to America Festival in Washington, D.C. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The World Bank is giving a major cyclone relief lifeline to Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi in the form of $700 million. At least 1,000 people were killed across the three countries after Cyclone Idai, the worst cyclone in decades. David Malpass, president of the Global Linda, is in Africa visiting the cyclone-weary Mozambican city of Beira on Friday and says the World Bank is still assessing the damage caused by Cyclone Kenneth that slammed Comoros before battering northern Mozambique last month. Malpass says more assistance may be coming. Meanwhile, officials in northern Mozambique have declared a cholera outbreak caused by a lack of clean water left behind from Cyclone Kenneth. More than a dozen cases have been reported a week after the storm hit the nation with powerful hurricane force winds. The United Nations Children's Fund says it is giving humanitarian aid to thousands of children who have been displaced by the storm.
And today we are here. This is always one of our biggest priorities, to see that they have safe drinking water, the children, so that they don't get sick, diarrhea, because it can easily become very dangerous for children.
Well, the Cyclone Kenneth death toll stands at 41, and health workers and international aid agencies are desperately trying to prevent more storm-related casualties. Friday is World Press Freedom Day. The global event is celebrated on May 3rd each year, but the realities faced by journalists in many parts of the world are increasingly hostile. A new report by an international media watchdog group says press freedoms have deteriorated in 2019, fueled in part by increasing aggression toward journalists. Why does a free press matter? VOA Jesusame Oni has more from this week's Plugged In with Greta Van Susteren.
Journalists around the world are being targeted as authoritarian governments try to tighten their grip on the media. A new study by Reporters Without Borders says a cycle of fear is diminishing press freedoms around the world and in America. Some call it an attack on the pillars of democracy.
It's the journalists really on the front lines of holding governments accountable and providing transparency. What is happening to people's rights, how their tax money is spent. And without journalists, governments can implement policies which restrict those rights, and corruption thrives.
Cyber attacks, arrests, and kidnappings are some of the tactics being used to intimidate members of the press, and in some cases, murder. China and North Korea remain listed among the worst offenders in the report. The United States saw a slight decline, dropping 3 points for a problematic climate where reports critical of some in high office is sometimes labeled fake news. Still, journalists say the U.S. Constitution protects and empowers them to continue the work.
And that's the difference between us and a lot of the other countries, which is the rule of law. The rule of law exists, and it's by and large respected, and that makes a huge difference between us and the rest of the world. For example, even though Voice of America is funded by the U.S. government, we have laws that keep us separate. So we are truly an independent voice.
In the Philippines, continued threats by President Rodrigo Duterte against the media have contributed to hostilities in a nation once applauded for having one of the greatest press freedoms in Asia. Media watchdogs say his most notable attacks have been against the media outlet Rappler.
If you look in the last 14 months, the Philippine government has filed 11 cases against us. In 2 months, I've had to post bail 8 times, and in just 5 weeks, I was arrested twice and detained once. That is an extreme erosion of our freedoms.
In April, Myanmar's top court upheld a 7-year jail sentence for 2 Reuters journalists who who were arrested while investigating the killings of Rohingya Muslims in 2017.
The case was clearly a setup. It was clear in every aspect. One of the police witnesses said he had had notes of the arrest, but he had burned his notes. Another one came in with writing on the side of his hand so he could remember what to say. A third one came in and said that they were instructed to set up our reporters. There's no question that they were arrested because they were reporting on this massacre.
Norway received the highest rank, while the overall numbers of countries considered safe for the media declined. Jesus Sameoni, VOA News, Washington.
In a trajectory apart from autocratic trends in Africa, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is lifting restrictions on the media and freeing detained bloggers and journalists. Websites and television stations that had been blocked are coming back online. Voice of America's Africa Division Director Negusi Mengesha was able to return to his native land for the first time in 4 decades. He shares his story of meeting Abiy as part of a personal journey of press freedom.
My name is Negusi Mengesha. I'm the director of the Africa Division, Voice of America. I used to work in my home country, Ethiopia. Actually, I worked under very difficult circumstances. There was total censorship. There is no freedom of the press. So imagine as a journalist, you are not free to report. I had to flee Ethiopia. That's late 70s, because I could not really practice my profession. I could not write freely. I could not speak freely. So I had to flee the country. It took me about 4 or 5 months, actually, to cross from Ethiopia to Sudan. And I ended up in a refugee camp in Sudan. I was sick. I had malaria. I had typhoid. I had fever. To be honest, I was on the verge of dying almost. So I was treated, and I was cured from there. So after staying 3 months in the refugee camp, I went to Khartoum. As a refugee, you really go through so much difficulty. You lose your identity. You lose yourself, who you are. You don't have a passport. You don't have even an ID. You don't have food to eat. You have to depend on United Nations rations. You see? So I saw that, I went through that. When people talk about refugees, the plight of refugees, their suffering, I feel it, I know it. Not only that, as a reporter, since I came here in 1982, I was employed. Then the whole in 1980s, early 90s, I traveled to Sudan. There were over 1 million Ethiopian refugees. As the former refugee, now started reporting about the refugees, giving them the voice. The Amharic program, actually, Voice of America, became the voice for the voiceless in the refugee camp. Close to 40 years. I was not allowed to go in Ethiopia. I requested, actually, 5 times to get a visa because I'm a U.S. citizen. I can't fly in my own home country. I'm carrying U.S. passport. I need a visa. I was denied 5 times. So I was persona non grata, almost close 40 years. I went back October 13, 2018. That was an experience. Yeah. I don't even know how to explain it, to be honest. It's just, first I had a lot of anxiety. The idea of going back home after so many years. You know, it's a guy, you go back there to visit the living ones and the dead ones. I was never there when my mom died. In fact, my mom came several times here, so almost for 25 years. I have seen her. But when she was sick, for the last days, I was not with her. I have never seen my dad. I missed him. He missed me. Without seeing each other, he died. I was never there when we were buried. So for the first time, I went to the burial site. I cried a lot, actually. I really cried a lot. But in a way, also, it was a closure. My highlight is definitely to see my mom's and my dad's burial site and meeting the new Prime Minister. I thanked him for opening up the political space, for allowing the media to operate freely. And actually, we're planning to strengthen our presence in that country. Hopefully, one day we'll have a VOA 24/7. I said, at the end of my visit, this is the most beautiful thing. That meeting for me was very, very important. Freedom of the press is close to my heart. I have seen journalists killed because they wrote freely, because they exposed corruption, mismanagement, or also injustice. So they wrote about it. So they lost their life. Still today, really many parts of Africa has serious problem in terms of the freedom of the press, free thought, free flow of information. So there is a big difference. Reporting here is like sitting in a paradise. You have all the freedom to research, to look for stories, report fact-based, of course, look for the balance. You can do that. You can criticize, or you can also give them positive stories. I think you have all the freedom compared to our colleagues on the continent. This place is more than a working place for me. It's like my family. I started as a reporter, then became senior editor. I became the Amharic chief. And then I moved to Central Africa, and I became the head. I started a new service from scratch in Kirundi, Kenya, Rwanda, 2 years after the genocide. Then I started the Zimbabwe service, Bambara service, Somali service. As I became a program manager. For the last 3 years, I have become the division director. Hope is extremely important, to be honest. Unless you hope, I don't think you will achieve. Unless you wish, unless you dream, you cannot achieve it. Hope is extremely important. If you lose hope, I think you lose yourself. So the dream and the hope became the truth. It just really happened. I was very happy to be back home.
Well, our global eyes are on Friday's World Press Freedom Day, as journalists in a number of African countries continue to experience threats and intimidation in moves aimed at silencing the independent voices. The media regulator in Uganda this week ordered the suspension of journalists at 13 local television and radio stations accused of airing sensationalized programming. The order followed the arrest of a pop star who plans to challenge President Yoweri Museveni. Now, for more on press freedom in Uganda, Captain Francis Babu, outgoing chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters in Uganda, joins me by phone from Kampala. Good evening, Captain Babu.
Good evening. I hope you're all well.
Yes, thank you. Now, we kind of were so surprised this week to hear that and the media regulator is calling for the firing of journalists. But can you clarify for us what exactly transpired in Uganda?
Well, basically, it's the politics. Once you have problems in the politics, it's the reporting of those politics that usually causes problems. Nothing else. They report on everything else until we get to the politics. Whenever there is politics and there are differences, dissenting views, rights up, and all sorts of things do happen. It is when the politics come on stage that we have these problems.
Now, in terms of the problems, what is the problem? We know that Bobi Wine was arrested, and NBS and other media houses reported that this happened, but it looks like the government took issue with that. Is it wrong to broadcast or to report that Bobi Wine has been arrested or that he's holding a protest somewhere?
Well, if that is what happened, I condemn it 100%. Unfortunately, my investigation shows that the reporting, the packaging, the methods of packaging that reporting did not go down very well with the people in the authorities. And therefore, they said it should be investigated. And therefore, they went to all the radios with mentions and televisions and told them that they directed that these people should be suspended until they have investigated. Now, the argument, whenever we have these political differences, each group, each system, they've got their own system. They do a lot of propaganda. They do a lot of they do all sorts of things, and it is this that is causing problems. How do you differentiate what one politician is saying against the other? And I think this is what is causing all these problems. Otherwise, I listened to this. I followed. The other televisions have not been mentioned. One of the most popular televisions here is NTV, the independent one. That one did not have any problem, but NBS had a problem. Now. It is to find out was the packaging of what they were showing, were they giving different voices from what was happening? These are the investigations that
now,
take place.
But though, is it okay for the commission to actually specifically target journalists and demand that they be fired? I mean, is that their prerogative?
No, they did not say firing. In fact, they said suspend and investigate.
Yeah.
I think that's where, again, false information has been sent out. They say stop them and investigate. Now, unfortunately, the law for a regulator does not say they can request. They direct, because they are the regulator. Now, whether this is good or not, we can go back and revise the law that the regulator should request investigation.
Okay.
I am very concerned with the methods. You see, government also, the people who make the law for us, sometimes overlook certain things that the law can be misinterpreted and misused. And I think this is where the problem is. The regulator, who's the UCC, should find ways and means of interfacing with the media houses.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll hope for the best.
I think that's where the problem is.
Okay.
The interfacing is not good.
Sure. We hope that will be resolved and the media can continue operating freely. Captain Babu,
No.
really...
That's why I want to congratulate the Prime Minister of Ethiopia.
Thank you.
He's setting a very good pace for all of us.
Thank you. We do actually appreciate your insight. Captain Francis Babu is the outgoing chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters in Uganda. Now, 25 years after the end of apartheid, race remains a contentious issue in South Africa. Often the focus is on relations between the country's black and white citizens. But Africa's so-called rainbow nation is much more diverse, with the latest census showing South Africans describe themselves and the country in terms of 5 racial groups. Jasmine Boren-Paul is a mixed-race South African woman, and she's written a book about her heritage called My Blood Divides and Unites. I sat down with her recently and asked her about the emotional and psychological complexities of race and identity in post-apartheid South Africa.
My blood was something that was important to me to work through, my blood being my genealogy. I'm historically mixed race, and that history goes back to the 1600s, where you had European settlers arrive in South Africa, and there was mixing with the indigenous Khoisan and mixing with slaves brought in from Indonesia, Madagascar, Sri Lanka, India, and other lands. When I was younger, so I was raised in a separate community for historically mixed race people. What most people would know about apartheid is that racial groups were separated by each other by law. We went to separate schools, lived in separate neighborhoods. This was our Jim Crow, basically. What people might not know is that people of color were also separated into separate groups. So you had blacks, Indians, and then historically mixed race people, which is referred to as colored. I know it's a very derogatory and sensitive word in the US. In South Africa, that's the legal category for historically mixed race people. And it was only when I got to university when I saw the disparity in my upbringing compared to other people.
Now, there's so many people in South Africa who may have a kind of conflict in themselves, or who have the same mixed blood background, but not necessarily delving into trying to find out why and where and you know, that all this came from. Why did you particularly feel compelled to really want to resolve this issue, this conflict within you, and not just live in the new rainbow nation of South Africa and just enjoy the freedoms that came with the end of apartheid?
I also have lived in the US for 2 years, in Switzerland for 4 years. So in international environments, people would ask me, who are you? I was once in a meeting in Ghana, and it was almost as though with the CEO of a big company, it was almost though he couldn't start the meeting until he had understood what was my ethnic background. And I'd say, I'm South African, and people will say, yes, we get that, but what exactly is your ethnic origin? So even with the question being posed to me internationally, it made me internalize it more, because I felt I needed to come up with an answer that represented me and represented my life. And also, I'm fortunate that the DNA test I did was with 23andMe, which is New York-based. In South Africa, there's limited opportunities to do DNA tests.
If you had the power to change certain things about South Africa in terms of race and ethnicity, what would you do in the categorizing people in the new South Africa?
There is a movement to put forward that colored people are recategorized as Khoisan, and I am in favor of that. While I embrace the different strands of my blood, if we have defined one label, then it's appropriate to use the Khoisan label, which talks to our African lineage.
Finally, so how does this blood, your blood, divide and unite? Who does it divide? Who does it unite, and how?
So for myself, my blood divides me in that I almost felt I needed to choose a path. I couldn't embrace myself in totality. And then it unites me in that I would say that, you know, I'm a beautiful product of, there was this conflict and unusualness in how it came together, but I would like to say I'm a beautiful product of that conflict. And as a message to the world, I think individuals, societies, and nations have contradictions in their past, have things that they find shameful, and I feel that my book is a message that is useful for the world at a time when where more divisions have resurfaced, as a way for societies and individuals to look at racial reconciliation through a new lens.
Well, high school students from across the United States visited Washington to read poetry out aloud in a contest sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Poetry Foundation. VOA's Azuma Compaore reports on a first-generation immigrant from Cameroon that was among the finalists.
Is there no power to rescue her?
Teenagers in the competition chose from more than 1,000 classic and contemporary poems, memorizing and performing them on stage for a chance at the $20,000 grand prize.
And delicate hesitations they become.
If he doesn't stoop down and scoop the mess up.
Amy Stolz is the director of literature programming at the National Endowment for the Arts.
Poetry is an art form that allows us to experience the beauty and the power and the meaning and the surprise of words and language, and to be able to recite it, to internalize a poem, and to share it with an audience is incredibly moving.
There was no music. The Right Reverend Al Green.
Judges say they are looking for physical presence, voice and articulation, evidence of understanding, dramatic appropriateness, accuracy, and overall performance.
That only owns her sway, 'tis well.
Washington, D.C. champion Rosalind Gachu recited Emily Dickinson's "Hope is the Thing of Feathers."
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings. I picked the poems that I picked because they kind of spoke to me. You know, I was on the website and I was just going through each poem and just finding one that I really connected with. There are so many ways you can interpret it. You know, what the author wrote may not be how I took it, but that's okay because poetry has so many different meanings depending on the person, and I feel like the fact that it's so versatile is what makes it so special.
Gachu came to the United States from Cameroon at a young age and had never before read poetry out loud before enrolling to the District of Columbia International School. Liz McCarthy is her poetry coach.
She does a lot of her own writing of poetry, but this really pushed her in terms of performance of other people's poetry. And she talked about how impactful that was in terms of her in developing her own understanding and developing her own performance skills.
And let's also
Rosalie did not advance to the finals, but enjoyed the competition.
I feel like I'm proud of myself for making it this far. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to the finals, but that's okay because there's always next year.
Isabella Cullery from the Midwest state of Minnesota was the winner of this year's Poetry Out Loud competition for her recitation of Thoughtless Cruelty by Charles Lamb.
The life you've taken to supply, you could not do it. You surely must have been devoid of thought and sense.
Azuma Compaore, VOA News, Washington.
You'll one day rule.
Well, in today's Music Makers segment, Nigerian singer-songwriter and producer Davido was recently here in Washington, headlining the Coming to America Music Festival, which also featured rappers from Congo and from Ivory Coast. Our red carpet team of Barbara Santos and Sims Lumami were there.
It was a busy weekend for the Nigerian-American singer. He released 3 new songs: All I Want with the Atlanta-based rapper Russ, Peace of Mind with Jamaican-American rapper Sean Kingston, and Father with the Ghanaian rapper Medi Cole. There's more. Davido made a surprise appearance at Idris Elba's wedding in Morocco on Friday, performing and singing with the groom and dancing with fashion designer Christian Louboutin while showing off their red button shoes. The groom, or should we say sexiest man alive, according to People magazine, rocked a tux by Ghanaian designer Oswald Boateng, while marrying model Sabrina Dore, who is of Somali descent. On Saturday, Davido took a private flight to Washington, D.C. to perform at the Coming to America Music Festival alongside French rapper of Ivorian origin Veg Dream and Congolese rappers Ski Black and NASA. Davido was the biggest name in the lineup and the last one to come up on stage. Wearing a full Versace outfit, he performed for about 20 minutes and sang some of his biggest hits, closing out with record-breaking Fall. Released in 2017, Fall is the first Nigerian music video to reach 100 million views on YouTube. The hit remained on the R&B hip-hop Billboard chart for 16 weeks, making it the longest charting Nigerian song in Billboard history. The song has been a success not only in Africa and the US, but also in the Latin American market, especially after the mention of the football player Cristiano Ronaldo in the lyrics.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now, be sure to tune in on Monday for the New Look Africa 54 with Esther Githuiwat as your primary news anchor, while I slide full-time into the managing editor post. But I'm not totally going away. From time to time, you'll see me on our newscast with special reports and interviews. So for now, thanks for watching and have a great weekend.